I struggled a bit getting into the driver's seat. It certainly wasn't the most graceful process. After adjusting the seat and mirrors to fit my frame, I spent about half an hour practicing getting in and out of the small car. Even after all that, I wasn't entirely sure I was doing it right. I had to train my mind to think and move in a more feminine way, imagining I had been a woman my whole life. There was no need to force any masculine habits. Maneuvering the pedals in heels proved to be another challenge. Once I accepted that this was as comfortable as I was going to get, I started the car, carefully backed out of the garage, and pulled onto the street. My priority was to leave the neighborhood quickly, avoiding any curious looks from neighbors who might wonder why a strange woman was driving my wife's car. As I hit the interstate, I began to feel more at ease driving in heels. I was headed downtown, but honestly, I wasn't sure where to go. Just driving around felt like an adventure in itself on my first night out as a woman. As I sat at a red light, a car pulled up beside me. I glanced over, and my heart nearly stopped. It was one of Gwen's friends. The color drained from my face as I realized it was Judy, the wild one in Gwen's circle. Panic set in as she rolled down her window to talk, and I frantically searched for the button to lower mine. What on earth was I going to say to her? Judy was a petite redhead with a vibrant personality, always full of energy. She had a toned figure, but her bust was disproportionately large for her small frame. She used to mention wanting a breast reduction, but I always thought it was part of what made her so attractive. Her legs, though, they were something else. Whenever she wore skirts or shorts, I couldn't help but stare. In heels, they looked even more irresistible, smooth and sensual. The last thing I needed was to run into her tonight, yet here we were. As I nervously lowered the window, she shouted for me to pull over. Hesitantly, I complied, and we both stopped on a quiet, empty block. Judy stepped out of her SUV, dressed as if she were headed for a date, wearing a short, white cocktail dress, tan nylons, and white pumps. As Judy approached my convertible, I felt a wave of unexpected lust wash over me. She walked with such confidence, and I couldn't help but notice how stunning she looked. When she reached my car, she didn't waste any time. "Hi, sorry to bother you, but I know the people who own this car, and they're out of town," she said bluntly. "I'll call the cops if you don't explain what you're doing with my friend's car." Panic rose in my throat, but I tried to keep my voice as feminine as possible. "I'm so sorry," I stammered, not even attempting to hide my fear. I work with Wally, and my car broke down." I lied, keeping the story as simple as possible. He told me his wife was out of town, and he let me borrow the car. Judy looked taken aback for a moment, her eyes drifting down to my legs. "Oh, I've been to his office before," she said skeptically. "I don't remember seeing you." Doing my best to sound feminine, I quickly turned the conversation back on her. "I'm sorry, I didn't catch your name." That seemed to soften her a bit. "Oh, sorry," she said, stepping back slightly. "I'm Judy." "Well, nice to meet you, Judy." "I'm Karen," I said, trying to sound confident. The name felt right in the moment. I just started working with Wally. He's such a great guy, and quite handsome too. I added the last part for good measure, hoping to sell the story. Even I could hardly believe I said it. "He's out with some of the guys tonight, but you can call him later to confirm," I replied, trying to keep my cool. Judy smiled. "All right, I guess that's fine. To be honest, I've had a rough night myself. Since you're new around here, how about joining me for a drink?" She must have noticed the flicker of fear in my eyes because she quickly started to downplay the offer, explaining more about her difficult evening. Before I knew it, I heard myself saying, "I'd be glad to grab a quick drink." After that tense exchange, I figured I could use one, and besides, Karen would definitely appreciate some company. I couldn't believe what was happening. I thought I'd fooled her, but was I really that foolish to agree to spend time with someone who could so easily expose me? My stomach churned as I followed her to a cozy little bar not far from her house. On the way there, my phone rang. It was Judy, trying to verify Karen's story. I answered in the gruffest voice I could muster, trying to sound like Wally. Sure enough, she asked about Karen. I pretended to be confused at first, acting as if I didn't know what she was talking about, and then suddenly remembered. I figured the hesitation might add a touch of authenticity to the lie. Once we arrived at the bar, I quickly refocused on maintaining my feminine demeanor. I paid close attention to how I exited the car, making sure to grab my purse, all while trying to ignore the sensation of the hose on my legs, which was oddly distracting. Judy smiled as she stepped down from her SUV, and I smiled back, amused by the irony of her driving a big truck while I maneuvered a tiny convertible. As she got a proper look at my height for the first time, I could feel her eyes on me, as if she was searching for something out of place. Immediately, I became self-conscious as we walked into the smoky bar. With no free tables in sight, we settled into a corner booth, and Judy slid in very close to me. At one point, our nylon-clad legs brushed together. I quickly pulled mine away and gave her a smile, which she returned with a similar expression. My mind raced, knowing I couldn't just order a beer. As the waitress approached, I felt a rising sense of panic about what to order. When she looked to me, I hastily grabbed the small drink menu and asked her to take Judy's order first, buying myself a bit more time. Judy ordered a dirty martini, and I immediately echoed her choice, despite secretly hating martinis. It fit the character I was trying to embody, and that was all that mattered in the moment. After we placed our orders, an awkward silence fell between us. My nerves spiked, worried that maybe she was onto me or sensed that something was off. I knew I had to steer the conversation toward her, or the night could quickly turn into a disaster. As we started talking, mostly about her, the tension slowly eased. Our drinks arrived, and I found myself becoming more comfortable, even managing to sit with my legs crossed and picking up a cute little laugh here and there. Judy seemed engrossed in her story about a failed date earlier that evening, venting her frustrations with men. I nodded and shook my head at the appropriate moments, all while focusing on maintaining my feminine posture. To my surprise, the transformation felt increasingly natural, even down to enjoying the martini, which I normally hated. The more we talked, the more I got into the rhythm of Karen, and I couldn't help but notice a few appreciative glances from men in the bar as they looked at both Judy and me. But there was something else happening as I sipped my drink and listened to Judy's complaints. I felt incredibly turned on, though my body wasn't reacting in the way it usually would. My little remained soft and tucked away, despite the heightened arousal. It was an extraordinary sensation, feeling sexually charged while still maintaining the feminine composure that had become part of my role for the night. My heart raced, and the buzz from the strong drink started to blur my thoughts. Sitting there, listening to Judy, I drifted into a strange trance. It was as if I forgot about my fears and inhibitions, and for a moment, I felt like I belonged in makeup, with long hair and heels. I made sure to keep my movements graceful, wrists loose, and posture relaxed, doing my best to maintain the illusion. By the time we reached our second round, I was feeling even more in tune with this feminine side of me. Then the mood shifted. Halfway through our second drink, two large men stumbled through the crowd and locked eyes on us. They were clearly drunk, swaying slightly and grinning like fools. Before I could make an excuse to leave, Judy, to my surprise, welcomed them over. One of them, a burly guy with dark hair and a rough 5 o'clock shadow, plopped down right next to me. The smell of cheap beer and body odor hit me every time he leaned in to join the conversation, and I wrinkled my nose instinctively. He wasn't exactly repulsive, though. He had a rugged charm, and I could see how some women might find him attractive. Still, I felt a strange mix of discomfort and intrigue as he sat close, the scent of sweat and alcohol clinging to the air between us. It was a situation I hadn't expected, and I wasn't sure how long I could keep up the charade now that things were getting more complicated. Judy seemed completely unfazed by her date's advances, embracing the closeness and flirting with him as if they were in their own private bubble. The conversation had turned into something more intimate, and it was clear they were deeply engrossed in each other. Brain, the man sitting next to me, was a student at the local college and expressed his dislike for the small girls on campus. I worked hard to maintain my composure, trying not to show any discomfort or unwanted interest while keeping up the act of being a woman. It was my first real test, and the situation was more challenging than I anticipated. As the night progressed and we moved into our fourth round of martinis, I felt increasingly uneasy. My worst nightmare came to life when Judy and her date began making out passionately. At the same time, Brain's hands started exploring my legs, and I could feel my anxiety mounting. Despite my nervousness, I was relieved that my buddy stayed soft. Brain's hands were surprisingly gentle and firm, slipping under my dress and causing a confusing mix of arousal and worry. I pressed my legs together and crossed them, trying to keep everything discreet. Despite the situation, I found myself submitting to his touch and returning his flirtations. The attention, though unsettling, was oddly exhilarating. As Judy fully immersed herself in a heated make-out session with her guy, I felt Brain's hands wander further up my legs. My nerves were on edge, and I couldn't ignore the growing arousal despite the precariousness of the situation. His touch was both gentle and assertive, and I was grateful that my body hadn't betrayed me. My body remained limp, hidden beneath the layers of fabric and my crossed legs. I squeezed my thighs together instinctively, hoping to prevent him from venturing too far, but I couldn't deny the strange thrill building inside me. His eyes met mine, and something shifted. Instead of resisting, I started returning his flirtations. There was a sense of power in holding his attention, even as my mind raced with caution. Judy, lost in her own world, was practically glued to her guy, their kiss deep and passionate. Meanwhile, Brain couldn't seem to keep his hands off me, and though it made me nervous, I realized that as long as he didn't move toward anything that could reveal the truth, I welcomed his advances. The attention felt strangely intoxicating, and I found myself relaxing into the role I was playing, blurring the lines between the person I was pretending to be and the part of me that was enjoying the experience. The smell of beer and his sweat, which had repulsed me at first, now mixed into something oddly intoxicating, a gritty, raw blend of sexual tension that made my body feel hot and alive. His arm wrapped around me with such strength, and I left my hand resting on his leg, almost without thinking. It was surreal. I had never thought of myself as homosexual. Guys had never been my type. But in that moment, it wasn't about attraction to men specifically. It was about something deeper, a validation of my femininity, of being seen and desired as a woman. A part of me was curious, almost desperate, to know if I was turning him on. His eyes darkened with intent as he leaned in closer. My pulse quickened, and my heart skipped a beat. The rush of it all, the thrill, the uncertainty, overwhelmed me, and before I could even think, his lips were on mine. The kiss was sloppy, wet, and far from perfect, but I found myself kissing him back, lost in the moment. His hands became bolder, slipping under my dress, gripping the curve of my thigh before sliding to my ass and pulling me closer to him. The heat between us was undeniable, and then, without any real thought or hesitation, I moved my hand down and felt him, his body hard against my palm. A wave of disbelief and excitement washed over me as I realized just how far things had gone. I had crossed a line I never thought I would, but in that moment, it didn't matter. The attention, the sensation, it was exhilarating, and I couldn't stop. The sensation was overwhelming, feeling Brain's hardness through his jeans, knowing that he was so turned on by me. It was the first time I had ever touched another man like that, and the size of him, larger than I had expected, only added to the surreal nature of the moment. There was a strange sense of pride, as though my success in embodying this female persona had been validated. I had managed to arouse him, and in turn, I found myself even more turned on by that fact. But then, the kiss started to go wrong. His tongue moved awkwardly, and the passion we had just shared began to fizzle out into something uncomfortable. It snapped me out of the hazy trance the martinis had lulled me into. I pulled away from him, my heart still pounding but my mind now clear. I'm sorry, I said softly, catching my breath. But I really have to be going. The disappointment in Brain's eyes was obvious, and it stung a little, knowing I had led him to this point only to pull back. I recognized that look. I'd been on the other side of it before, but I couldn't let things go any further. I gave him a gentle smile, trying to soften the blow. You're a sweetheart, and honestly, you're a great kisser, I lied a little. But I have a meeting in the morning, and I really need to get some rest. As I spoke, my change in demeanor seemed to catch Judy's attention. Her focus shifted from her own situation as she noticed my sudden shift from the heat of the moment back to reality. The night had taken a turn I hadn't expected, and it was time to make an exit before things became even more complicated. As we gathered our things and stood to leave, the boys, still riding the high of the evening, politely paid for our drinks. Judy and I made our way out of the bar, but my mind was swirling, replaying every moment, every touch, and every sensation from the night. I felt dizzy, a mix of too much alcohol and the overwhelming, conflicted feelings brought on by the sexual experience I just had. I was both aroused and unsettled, the strange cocktail of emotions making it hard to think straight. As we reached my little car, Judy suddenly stopped me. She must have sensed something was off. Why don't you and I grab some drinks at my place? She suggested casually, but I could tell there was more behind her words. I tried to brush it off, telling her I was done for the night, ready to go home and process everything alone. But before I could get into my car, she grabbed my arm gently but firmly, pulling me close. She leaned in, her breath warm against my ear as she whispered, "You know the night doesn't have to end, Wally." Her words made me freeze. The name, my real name, Wally, pulled me back to reality, breaking through the illusion I'd been living in for the last few hours. I looked at her, feeling utterly helpless. She knew, and the weight of that realization hit me hard. Embarrassed, I stammered out a response, unsure of what else to say. I guess it would be fine to have a glass of wine at your place." Her knowing smile sent a mix of relief and anxiety through me, and as I followed her to her car, I couldn't help but wonder where the rest of the night would take us. As I followed Judy's SUV, my thoughts spiraled in every direction. What was I doing? Why hadn't I just gone home? The fear gnawed at me. What if she called Gwen and everything came crashing down? I loved Gwen, and the last thing I wanted was to complicate things with her. Yet, here I was, pulling into Judy's driveway, my stomach twisting into knots. Her townhouse was charming, but all I could think about was how much I wanted to turn around and leave. Judy gracefully slipped out of her SUV, and I couldn't help but feel another wave of strange attraction. I was playing a role, trying to embody this womanly persona as I stepped out of Gwen's convertible, doing my best to move gracefully, as a woman would. She smiled warmly and took my hand, leading me inside. Once inside, I collapsed onto the couch, immediately aware of how unladylike I looked. Quickly, I crossed my legs, trying to regain some semblance of composure. Judy sat down next to me, a curious but understanding look on her face. "So," she asked, her voice soft yet direct, "how long have you been like this?" I hesitated for a moment, then gave up the act, speaking in my normal voice. Today was my first day dressed in public. The weight of the day suddenly felt heavier as I started explaining everything to her, the whole story, from how I ended up dressed like this to the lie I had spun earlier in the car. I laid it all out, feeling both relieved and terrified as I spoke. Judy listened quietly, her expression unreadable, but she didn't interrupt. There was something comforting about finally being honest, even if I had no idea how she would react. As Judy poured wine and listened attentively, I told her everything, about what I had done and the lies I had spun. After a moment of silence, I asked, "When did you find out?" She took a sip of wine and answered casually, "When I called you from the car. I saw you talking on your phone with me. You can talk to me as Karen." I felt my throat tighten, but I forced myself to clear it and continue. "So you knew at the bar?" She smiled, a bit amused. "Yes, and I have to say, I was surprised when you kissed another man." Her words hung in the air for a second before she asked, with a slight pause, "Are you gay?" I shook my head, feeling the weight of that question. "No," I replied. I didn't want to blow my cover as a woman, and I hesitated, feeling vulnerable, unsure if I wanted to say the rest out loud. "And what?" she asked, raising an eyebrow with curiosity. "And I wanted to see if I was woman enough to turn on a man," I admitted quietly, feeling my face flush with embarrassment. Judy looked at me, her expression softening. "I see. Well, you're very passable. Maybe just a little more work on your makeup," she said with a kind smile. "Does Gwen know?" "No," I replied, my voice dropping. The shame and sadness crept in as I thought about how I had kept this secret from Gwen, and the wine wasn't helping, as it only deepened the feeling of being overwhelmed. Judy's laughter broke the tension a bit when I admitted that the kiss hadn't been enjoyable. "Did you like kissing your man?" she teased. "No," I said, a small smile tugging at my lips. "He was a horrible kisser." Judy sat down beside me, her laugh easing the awkwardness. She placed her hand on my knee, the touch warm and comforting. "Well," she said softly, "your secret is safe with me." Those words brought a wave of relief over me, and for the first time that night, I felt like I could breathe a little easier. Judy's understanding and light-heartedness gave me a sense of calm that I hadn't expected. I sipped my wine, leaning into the moment, grateful for her acceptance. Judy's words seemed almost like an afterthought, but they held a weight I didn't fully understand. I looked at her, my mind still foggy from the wine and the events of the night, unsure of what she was trying to say. Her eyes met mine, and there was something vulnerable there, something I hadn't seen in her before. "Look, most of my girlfriends are married," she began, her voice soft but thoughtful. "None of them want to stay single anymore." I listened, unsure where she was going, but feeling the shift in the conversation. For the first time, I felt so free to just. She trailed off, searching for the right words. "You saw me with that guy," she continued. I nodded, remembering the way she had kissed him at the bar, her confidence, her freedom. "I haven't been able to do that in a while," she admitted. "There's just something so sexy about making out with a strange guy. And with you there, I felt safe. I knew nothing was going to happen." Before I could even process her words, she leaned in and kissed me fully on the lips. It caught me off guard, but in the best way possible. Her kiss wasn't rushed or overly intense, but it was passionate, full of heat and softness at the same time. Her hands, still resting on my leg, began to move upward, and I could feel the warmth of her touch through the thin fabric of my dress. My mind was swimming, and for the first time that night, I felt my body responding, my little friend, hidden beneath layers of fabric, slowly stirring to life. The kiss continued, a delicious mix of both of our lipsticks, making it slippery but not too wet. Her lips were full and soft, perfectly matching the gentle hunger of the moment, and I felt as though I was floating in some kind of dream. Her hand slid higher, reaching the tops of my black stockings, and then it stopped. The air between us was thick with unspoken possibilities. Although she didn't go further, I could feel the tension, the unspoken invitation lingering in the space between us. And in that moment, I realized that if she had wanted to go further, I would have let her, without hesitation. The intensity of the kiss, the intoxicating smells, and the sensations swirling around us made it feel like time had slowed down. When Judy finally pulled away, she looked deeply into my eyes, her expression soft but searching. Her big, dove-like eyes held an unexpected question. "Would you be my new girlfriend?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper, as if the vulnerability in her words was too much to speak any louder. Her question hit me like a shockwave, snapping me out of the trance I had been lost in. I stood up quickly, my mind racing as the gravity of the situation began to sink in. "Look," I started, my voice shaky but determined. This was a mistake. I didn't plan any of this. I just did it to get off tonight. I never thought it would go this far. I never expected to go out in public, or to run into you, let alone kiss some guy." Judy's face remained calm, but I could see she was listening carefully, hanging on every word I said. I wanted to see what it felt like. I continued, to be dressed like this and to experience it, maybe even to have sex as a woman. But I don't want to cheat on Gwen. I can't jeopardize that, not now. This was just me being a pervert, I guess. A stupid, selfish fantasy. There was a long silence as Judy absorbed what I had just said. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest, the weight of my confession lingering heavily in the air. I knew I had hurt her, confused her, but at the same time, I could feel my own desire still pulling at me, the temptation of what could happen between us right now. I wanted her, wanted to push her back on the couch, to feel her under me, my nylon-covered legs tangled with hers, but I knew it wasn't right. Judy looked down for a moment, her hand resting on the space where I had been sitting. I couldn't tell what she was thinking, but the silence between us spoke volumes. Finally, she looked up, her expression a mix of disappointment and understanding. As the mood shifted, the air between us became heavier, more serious. I felt the urge to leave growing stronger, but when Judy stood up and wrapped her arms around me in a big hug, I couldn't help but lean into it. Our heels clicked together softly as our legs brushed, sending a jolt of sensation through me. Her perfume, mixed with the faint, lingering scent of my wife's, created an intoxicating atmosphere. It was a surreal moment, almost as if I was caught between two worlds. When she pulled away and looked at me, her eyes were filled with understanding, but there was something else, desire. "I can understand, I guess," she said softly. "I know what you're going through. But I am turned on by you right now, and this could be our little secret. You don't have to kiss guys if you don't want to." Her words comforted me, but they also stirred something deeper. There was an unspoken permission in what she said, a validation of the conflict and confusion I had been feeling. And despite everything, I found myself leaning into her again, giving her a soft peck on the lips. It was brief, but electric, and I could feel the tension rise between us again. "I should go home," I said, though the words felt heavy on my tongue. Judy gave me a playful but understanding smile. "Are you dressing tomorrow?" "I don't know," I replied, unsure if I'd even have the courage after tonight. "Please do," she said, her voice a little more insistent, "and call me." She hugged me once more, and I felt the warmth of her body against mine, her scent lingering in the air as I pulled away. I made my way back to Gwen's car, my heart pounding, my mind still buzzing with everything that had happened. As I slipped into the driver's seat, once again trying to embody the grace of a woman, I couldn't shake the feeling of being caught between two lives, unsure of which one I wanted more. Driving away, I realized that Judy's invitation had left a door open, and part of me was still standing in that doorway, not yet ready to close it. The drive home felt like a blur, my thoughts still tangled from the night's events. My body ached, not from exertion but from the emotional whirlwind that had taken over. Pulling into the garage, I stepped out of the car, the familiar click of my heels echoing in the empty space. As I walked through the door, I could smell the lingering traces of cigarettes and Judy's perfume mixed in with my own scent. The air of the house felt different now, almost as if I had brought some of the night's confusion inside with me. Once inside, I kicked off my heels, sighing in relief as my feet were free from their constriction. I caught a glimpse of myself in the hallway mirror. Despite everything, despite the guilt, the confusion, and the tension, there was still something undeniably alluring about the reflection staring back at me. The curves, the smoothness of my legs, even without the heels, it all felt so intoxicating. I couldn't help it. My hands started to roam, slowly tracing the lines of my body, feeling the softness of the fabric against my skin. Piece by piece, I stripped away my clothes, leaving only the pantyhose clinging loosely around my ankles. Naked, except for that last remnant of my outfit, I stood there, my hand instinctively reaching for my little friend. My reflection was still framed by the wig and makeup, creating an almost surreal image of the person I had become tonight. I didn't rush. This wasn't like before, when the urgency of release took over. My strokes were slow, deliberate, as if I was savoring the moment. The sensation of the pantyhose around my ankles, the feel of my hand moving rhythmically, the image of my face painted in makeup, all of it combined to create a heightened sense of pleasure. I stood there, caught between the person I was and the person I had been tonight, until finally, with a quiet sigh, I relieved myself. As the afterglow settled in, I looked at my reflection one more time. I wasn't sure what I was looking for, answers maybe, or some kind of understanding, but all I saw was the same figure staring back, and with that I peeled off the pantyhose, leaving them in a pile on the floor, and made my way to the shower, still unsure of what any of this meant for tomorrow. As I lay in bed that night, my mind raced through everything that had happened. I replayed the evening in vivid detail, dressing up, the unexpected kiss with Brain, being caught by Judy, and the way she had pulled me into that deep, unforgettable kiss. It was like a movie looping over and over in my head, the emotions clashing with each memory. After cleaning up the mess I had made, I slipped into the shower, scrubbing away the makeup and remnants of the night. Even as I washed it all off, the feelings lingered, a strange mix of exhilaration, confusion, and excitement. When I was finally clean, I dried off and, on an impulse, slipped into a pair of my wife's panties. The fabric hugged my skin in a way that felt both comforting and arousing. With that last act, I crawled into bed, my mind still buzzing, but eventually, exhaustion took over and I drifted into a restless sleep. The next morning, I woke to a knock at the door. It was Judy. She greeted me with a smile and a glint in her eyes. "I'm here to take you shopping, Karen," she announced cheerfully. I hesitated, still uncertain about everything that had transpired, but Judy's enthusiasm was infectious. She helped me get dressed in one of Gwen's jogging suits, her hands deftly guiding mine through the process of passing off as a woman. Her confidence was reassuring, and little by little, I found myself slipping back into the mindset I had the night before. Judy worked with me, fixing my hair and adding light makeup until I could almost believe that the reflection in the mirror was someone new, someone I could be for the day. With a laugh and a quick check in the mirror, we set out. The day was filled with little moments of discovery. Judy and I wandered through boutiques, clothing stores, and makeup shops, her presence giving me the courage to explore this side of myself openly. "Anytime Gwen is away," she said with a mischievous smile, "you should come to my place for a more formal lesson in deportment." By the end of the week, we had spent so much time together that it felt natural, even comforting. Judy took me to a quaint little place in Sunrise, Florida, a hidden gem that catered to people like me. They had everything from clothing and wigs to makeup and accessories, a haven for exploration. As we browsed through the racks, I felt a strange sense of belonging, a feeling that I was starting to understand more about myself, even if it left me with more questions than answers.